Unpack. We have 2 sessions this evening that are hosted by the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, which Network Nova is a part of, and about 40 other groups participate in this coalition. And we will put more about the link to the coalition in the chat, so please check it out, and you may be interested in joining. You want to be part of the coalition, and if you're in the coalition and you're in this session, shout out to your team up here, give them some confidence. And we would like to say hello to Dennis Orsinger. You're a great, been a great team member with the summit. You did great graphics, and you are the webmaster of the coalition. Thank you for your tireless work. So session 1 is the coalition conversation, part 1, the 2020 legislative unpack. And then the 7 p.m. session will be coming up, and that's the second part of the conversation, the focus on climate and clean energy. So this session is moderated by—
Before we get going, Catherine, let's do the housekeeping.
Oh my gosh, I just went on and on and on, didn't I? Thank you for stopping me. And we need to do housekeeping because this is what we do. So thank you.
So just a few little pieces of housekeeping. First, to remind everyone that the Women's Summit is a community of mutual respect and open-mindedness, and that we have a zero tolerance for harassment. Also, identify yourself with your name. This is a community conversation, and we want to know you by your name, not by your calling card. To connect you with all the wonderful events we're doing here at the summit, you'll be getting 2 emails a day, the daily lineup, which tells you about all the exciting events that day, and the summit recap that lets you know what occurred. Also, access to all sessions, all links are in all emails. Now, this event would not be possible without the support of all of our sponsors, Campaign for Family-Friendly Economy, Win Virginia, VA Our Way, our wonderful partners. But here we are at with the coalition, and really this would not be possible without all of you who supported us, believed in us, and stayed with us when we flipped from an in-person event to a virtual event. So thank you, all of you in the room. This is because of you. And now, Catherine, I'm giving it back to you.
Thank you very much. You can see our panel is up, and you can look at their lovely mugs over here on the screen. And we also have Josh Cole with us, and he'll be introduced later. But thank you, Josh, for joining us. How awesome is it to have you. And this session is moderated by the awesome Luisa Boyarski. Welcome, Luisa. Luisa is the Associate Director of Georgetown University's Center for Public and Nonprofit Leadership and Assistant Research Professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy. But we know you from being a sister when we met you back in the early days of activism in 2017. At your time at Together We Will Northern Virginia. And now you're the leader of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. So without much further ado, let's get this session started, and it's over to you, Luisa. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies, and thank you for all of your support for putting this Women's Summit together. It is amazing how impactful the summit has been year after year. So I'm excited to get started with this panel. This is going to be focused on what we did this year during the legislative cycle. So I'm going to introduce all of our speakers. First, we are going to have Josh Cole, who is a delegate in our State House of Representatives. He represents the 28th District, which encompasses Stafford County and Fredericksburg in Virginia. He has served on this Stafford County Public Schools Superintendent's Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity Committee. Also, he serves on the Greater Fredericksburg Area Interfaith Council, and he's the president of the Stafford County NAACP. Most importantly, just last week, Josh was elected to be our new member of the DNC. So thank you, Josh, for all of the service that you give to us in so many different ways. Next is Sharon Shutler. She is the co-chair of the Clean Energy and Climate Working Group of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. She previously worked on environmental law and policy at the Department of Justice, and prior to that at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. Michelle Woolley is the co-founder of the Coalition to Repeal the Right to Work, and she is a former civil rights, labor, and employment lawyer, and currently works as a nonprofit and political consultant. Then we have Brad Haywood. He is the founder and executive director of Justice Forward Virginia. And he is employed as the chief public defender for Arlington County in the city of Falls Church in Virginia. And finally, Gary Broderick. He is the legislative strategist for Rise for Youth. In this role, Gary leverages people power to work with elected officials to enact reforms that will improve the lives of our youth and their families while transforming juvenile and racial justice in Virginia. So we have a great panel, but I want to note that this is also going to be an interactive session. So I would love for you to use the chat feature to share comments as our panelists are speaking, to share questions. And then we're also going to have some breakout rooms to give you a chance to get to know each other and network and talk amongst yourselves about some of these topics. So let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Josh Cole, who's going to just give us a couple of thoughts about where we are right now as a society, both here in Virginia as well as nationally, and just put this all in perspective. So turning it over to you, Josh.
Well, good afternoon or evening rather, everyone. I don't know, can you see me? Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I am so excited to join you all. I'm a little disappointed we can't be in person according to what's going on, but it's good to see so many different beautiful faces and familiar faces of friends here virtually. First of all, thank you for inviting me and having me to discuss where we are. I wanted to talk about just a few things to get us started. I think it's no secret that where we are right now, there's a lot of things that are coming to the head, a lot of things that are being forced to reconcile and forced to consider and forced to acknowledge. And so race relations are at the forefront of every discussion right about now. Whether you're an elected official, whether you're a family member, whether you're a parent, it's forcing everyone to have these conversations. And I think it's needed conversations that have to take place. But when we look at everything else, you have healthcare, which is a situation that everyone's working with because we have the COVID-19. And because of healthcare and because of COVID-19, jobs, people are talking about their jobs. Many people are filing unemployment. And then you also have voter accessibility. And so all of these fall into one place where we are fighting as far as grassroots organization and how you all can help. And each and every one of these issues, you can help by organizing, by having communications and sharing with those around you how we can make things better. We can communicate and we can talk to make healthcare better and accessibility to healthcare. We can talk about jobs, we can talk about race relations, and we can talk about voter accessibility. And so where we are as a society, we do have some things to deal with. We do have some things to fight to make better. And as I've been out in the community with a lot of the young people and the protesters, I keep reminding them, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we cannot get tired. They're going to require times where we have these hard conversations with friends and family members. And I've seen so many friends on social media saying, I blocked this person, I don't talk to that person. If you don't have the mental or the emotional capacity to do that, I understand. But for those of us who are strong enough to have the mental capacity and the emotional capacity to have these hard conversations as it relates to health, jobs, race relations, voter accessibility, and organizing, we have to keep having these conversations with our friends and our family members. As hard as it may be, the reason we have the emotional capacity and the mental capacity to do it is because we have to help those who can't. So we have to stay on top of it. We have to have these conversations and we have to keep pushing forward. And so I'm excited to be with you here today. I'm excited to learn from so many who are here and to see how I can help. And I'm sticking around. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Josh. We are so excited to have you as an ally in this work and to be able to support you in the many efforts that you are trying to push through in Virginia. So what I would like to do now is turn to the panel, and we have a couple of questions for each of the panelists to answer. And then we're going to wrap up that, come back to Josh and sort of get his response to what those panelists have shared. So the first question we want to discuss is, what aspects of your advocacy worked well during the 2020 legislative session? And we're going to start with Brad. Brad?
Hi, everyone. Brad Haywood with Justice Forward Virginia. So what we did well this year and what worked well was we got an early start Our organization does criminal justice reform. What we found out in the first 2 years of our existence, we were founded in 2017, and the first 2 sessions that we were involved with, we didn't get an early start and we got nothing done. And I'll explain to you why it's important to get an early start on the legislative calendar. It's because we have a part-time legislature. That means it's expected that everyone in the legislature is going to have a job somewhere else, and almost all of them do. In addition to having a part-time legislature, each one of our legislators has 1 legislative assistant, except for party leadership. And once session hits, it lasts 60 days, and they have, this year, 2,000 bills to consider. Even on high-profile issues like criminal justice reform, if you aren't thinking about it the whole year, once session hits, you're not going to get up to speed. So the only way for advocates to really get their message through to legislators, and I'm not selling these people short, they're smart, they can pick up on it, you got to talk to them before session. So what we did last year was, actually about a month ago this time last year, we started reaching out to legislators to start having like off-season conversations to explain to them our issues, what our legislative priorities were, and what we were going to be doing come, November when they're drafting bills, and January when they're introducing them, and then, through the session when they're trying to get them passed. So that's what we did well, get an early start.
Awesome, thank you. So really getting started early is so important in Virginia. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Michelle.
Well, I think this year, so we didn't start our coalition until November right before the General Assembly session started. And our goal was to kind of amplify the message of the importance of why we wanted to repeal right to work and just broaden that movement. There's a lot of progressive folks out there that I think support unions, but aren't union members. So aren't necessarily connected with labor unions out knocking doors and, talking to legislators. And we wanted to kind of bring them into that movement. And I think we did that really well. We had an amazing kickoff event right away. We got within weeks, we had dozens of organizations, grassroots organizations signing on to support. And by the end, we now have 50 organizations that are supporting the repeal of right to work. And so I think we really did that well. And we really roped in a lot more folks on this issue. And I think it really showed our legislators that this isn't just a thing. This isn't just unions, a power play for unions, or something that they just care about. It's a thing that the people that a lot of people who help get them elected care about. It's a thing that working people really care about. So
that's great. So I think what's so important was that you took a message that was already out there and thought about how do we amplify this and get it in front of more people so that we can build the movement. And that is a really great strategy for grassroots groups. So thank you.
And we did it with no money. I will also say that.
Sounds super like the grassroots. Awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon. Sharon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I'm going to basically amplify a little bit about what Michelle just said. We were also new. Our group, which was the Climate and Clean Energy Working Group, which was associated with the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, did not form until December 2019. And at that time, we identified 5 key bills that we were going to adopt for 2020. And part of our strategy really was to differentiate ourselves from other activists such as environmental groups working on clean energy issues, and that would include Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Natural Resources Defense Council, etc. To be clear, these are fabulous groups and they're doing fabulous work. But sometimes it's easy for legislators for whom environmental issues is not at the forefront to dismiss issues raised by traditional environmental groups. That's just a subset of our constituents. Climate, how bad issue really is it? We don't have the money to focus on these issues. They're just higher priority items. So for us, we tried to let the legislators know at the outset that our parent organization, the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, was first and foremost an organization dedicated to electing progressive candidates, and that we canvassed thousands of hours in support of Democrats, progressive candidates in 2017, 18, 19 election cycles, and we raised a lot of money. And this allowed us to sort of underscore 2 different points. First, other groups, like Michelle was talking about, not just environmental groups, are passionate about climate and the related clean energy issues. And second, we are a potent, politically active force, and we put our money where our mouths are. And to be honest, that latter point helped progressive, at that latter point, caught the attention of some of the legislators that I think would have been more, you know, they would have dismissed us more easily. So doing this differentiating really helped for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. And Gary.
Hey everyone, I'm very excited to be here with you today. My name is Gary, I'm from Rise for Youth, and Rise for Youth is an organization that advocates for alternatives to youth incarceration. Let me just briefly say thank you to Luisa and Network Nova and the Virginia Grassroots Coalition for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is a very important conversation. And I think in part, this is a very important conversation because we are in a moment, you know, I'm in Richmond where there's been 20 straight days of protests in the street. And it's really clear that we are in a moment that has significant danger, but also significant opportunity. And I think this relates to my thinking about what we did well and what was successful this legislative session, which is that when I think about these protests that are in the streets in Richmond every day, I think about what a former advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., Bayard Rustin, said, will we move from protests to politics? And I think Rise for Youth was successful in bringing together a coalition of resourced organizations like ACLU and Virginia Organizing to support our key legislation, more grassroots, less resourced organizations that existed in Hampton and Newport News, where there's very high rates of youth incarceration, and then with legislators from the most effective areas and connecting them with progressive legislators like Delegate Cole around the state. And so we brought together a coalition of grassroots people with legislators that represented affected areas and then progressive legislators statewide. We had Delegate Ward and Senator Locke be our key leaders, which allowed for them to lead in a way that I think made a lot of sense, both narrative-wise and in terms of their ability to speak to the issue. And I felt very proud of that work.
That's great. So I think it's so important to be focusing on where the issues are, you know, are really impacting Virginians the most, but then also really building those relationships with those representatives. So thank you so much, Gary. All right, so we're going to move on to our next question, which is, what were the major barriers that you faced with your advocacy during this past session? So I'm going to start with Michelle. Oh, unmute yourself.
Sorry. So I think we had kind of two things. One, and it was, you know, we had support in the House, and we knew that we had, you know, Delegate Cole was one of our co-patrons on the Repeal Right to Work bill. And we knew we had a good base of support there. But based on the Virginia AFL-CIO had made support of repealing right to work a predicate to getting their endorsement in the 2019 election season. And so we knew based on that, we had a lot of senators, Democrats and Republicans, who had not gotten that endorsement. And so we knew going in that we had a Senate issue. You know, Majority Leader Saslaw, who we knew didn't support it. I will say he is good on some other labor issues, so we can't universally trash him on, you know, that thing, but he didn't, but repealing right to work was not one of his priorities. And so we knew that was going to be a challenge. And then I think layered on top of that, you know, Governor Northam said pretty upfront that he wasn't going to be interested in repealing it. He's not a pro-labor governor. He pushed back a lot of hard-fought labor bills that were supposed to go into effect because of COVID. So, you know, we knew that was going to be an issue. And so for us, you know, we're stuck with the Senate we're stuck with, but also, you know, having that governor there for now is also a problem, and just not having that support from the top to squeeze the Senate or the folks in the Senate to kind of, you know, to create the momentum to push the governor to feel differently as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this one issue reminds us that we still have work to do in terms of elections, right? If we want some of our most progressive issues that we would like to see passed are going to take a little bit more time in Virginia. Just because we flipped the House and Senate does not mean we've created all the change that we need to create. So thanks, Michelle. Sharon.
So the Virginia Grassroots Coalition is only 3 years old. It's a new kid on the block. And because of that, we had not focused on the General Assembly, as I mentioned, until just recently, after we helped flip the State House blue. So not surprisingly, one of the biggest issues we felt we had is we did not have a seat at the negotiating table. And this was particularly true for the Climate and Clean Energy Working Group. However, having said that, relative youth aside, the number of groups that get to sit at that clean energy table is pretty darn small. Even some of the big environmental groups don't have a seat, and for some of those groups, that seat is way, way, way back. We do hope this process is going to change, but right now, those people that get to sit at that table are weighted heavily by the groups that Dominion and the utilities want to have at that table. So for now, the practical reality is that without having a seat, it is very hard for us to weigh in on the complex and fast-breaking changes in critical bills such as the Virginia Clean Economy Act as effectively as we would like to be. And complicating matters further because it's such a fast-moving session, as was discussed earlier, and it's a relatively closed process. We often had to find out about these fast-breaking changes through backdoor channels. And that is not what I would call a transparent process, and it really hurts the effectiveness of our advocacy. It tends to favor special interest groups at the expense of the citizens in the Commonwealth.
Thanks, Sharon. So part of the goal going forward is finding ways to get that seat at the table. And for Grassroots, it is more challenging because we don't have the same kind of staffing and money and all the other things. So, but it's something that we're all thinking about. So thank you for sharing that. Gary, do you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I'm going to start kind of bigger picture because I think it speaks to the root, and then I'll share how it kind of affected us. I think in Virginia, because corporations still have so much political power over the process, progressive taxation is in many ways kind of forced off the table. So at 6%, we have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the country, and it hasn't been raised in 40 years. We have a flat tax on income tax. And so that creates a lot of downward pressure on how money is allocated. And it creates a cultural context in the legislature where the budget is seen as almost apolitical, not as if it's the result of political choices that have been made about who gets taxed, about what our priorities are, about whether we're going to give Amazon tax subsidies or not. And so that being depoliticized, the budget being depoliticized, creates a much narrower scope of conversations. So at Rise for Youth, we understand very well that best practices for young people is if a young person as a last resort does need to be held by the state, then the way to make sure it sets it up in a rehabilitative fashion is for them to be in small facilities, 30 beds or less, and in the community they're from. And so even though to understand this comprehensively, in many ways would not mean this would be more facilities, right? We just need to have a dialogue about what we're going to do. But our opponents at the Department of Juvenile Justice were able to paint us as asking for multiple facilities across the state. And they were then able to say, that's going to be very, very expensive. And they were not forced, I'm blanking the name, but the agency that does the scoring, financial scoring at the state legislature, we're not forced to say, this is how much it will cost or save over the next 3 years, over the next 5 years. This is how it interacts with other legislation, like no longer being able to charge kids with disorderly conduct or raising the minimum wage. The agency that does the analysis of the financial impact really tries to act like it's not a political agency, and its scope is really narrowed. And I think that's a major barrier for all progressive fights at the Virginia State Legislature.
Yeah, I'm watching the chat and people are agreeing with you on this as well. I think it's an important barrier that we need to take seriously and think about how are we going to address it moving forward? I'm going to turn it over to Brad. Brad?
So barriers for us, and this was sort of already talked about, sort of along the lines of transparency. I think even when it is transparent, it's just our lawmaking process is so absolutely insane that there's a built-in advantage for establishment and for professional lobbyists. So just, you know, again, like I said, it's a 60-day session. They often work on weekends. Committees often go late into the night. Their schedules are completely unpredictable. Even if you know a committee member, even if you know the committee chair, even if you're texting with a committee chair, if you know the bill sponsor, you may only get 12 hours notice or 18 hours notice to get down to Richmond and talk about your bill. And sometimes even less than that. I remember earlier this year, I was actually in court. I was in court arguing a motion in court. And I got a text like, they're going to call this afternoon. Can you be here? It was from a legislator. I'm like, shoot. And I got in my car an hour later and I got down there and I get down there and I wait for 2 hours and then they adjourn the session of the hearing. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, wasted obviously a lot of time. And it's not like I don't have an important day job. But anyway, if you're not there, you lose, especially on an issue like criminal justice reform. A lot of you may not know this. This is a little plug for this. There are very, very, very few criminal justice reform advocates in Virginia. There are very few people who are willing to devote their time or their money to this task. And on the other hand, there are a ton of people that favor the status quo and sort of the tough on crime law enforcement side of things. In particular, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys. So every elected Commonwealth attorney gets to spend 2 weeks in Richmond during the session. I don't get to spend a day of paid time in Richmond as a public defender. They have 4 paid prosecutors in the committee hearings every single day, every key committee hearing, and they are trusted by our legislature. So if they're there and we're not, we simply lose. So other spheres know how this works. You have paid lobbyists to deal with, and they're people who are based out of Richmond. But how, as a group of volunteers, can you compete with that? And I think even now, with criminal justice reform sort of taking the spotlight right now in the policy discussions, you're already seeing just the influence of groups that are opposed to criminal justice reform shaping the narrative. And how much worse is that when you don't even have somebody to, you know, push back? So it's a huge, you know, obstacle, and definitely one that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for naming that, because I think it's something that we all have to take very seriously. Oh, looks like we just left whatever mode we were in. Oh, Eileen Davis, can you unshare your screen?
Oh. How do I do that? Okay.
Oh, okay. That was helpful. Okay.
That was the best screen I think I saw. I think that was the
I know.
We're going to figure that out. Give us a second.
I'm trying to make it go away. I want to be seen. I had it there as a saver and I can't take it down at all.
No worries. We're good for now. Okay. So we're going to move on to our last question with the panel. And that is, what will you change or build upon for future sessions? So we'll start with Gary.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think that one of the big things that we feel like we need to change is we need to do more to kind of shape the entire paradigm and within which that we are going to have this discussion about how we treat kids. And that sometimes at our organization, what we say is, will America be America to Black kids? One of the ways we think we might be successful in really pushing the envelope in a direction that we want to go long-term, but also one that we think can help shape the conversation this upcoming session, is what if we imagined, consistent with our responsibilities to, frankly, to treaties we're signed on to, what if we imagined that when a young person commits a crime, that we didn't treat that as something that should be handled by the Department of Incarceration or Department of Homeland Security and Public Safety, but that it should be under the Director of Health and Human Services. That's something that places like the state of California have done, who were then much more effective in responding to the COVID-19 crisis. The other thing that we are definitely going to do is we're seeing legislatures now talk about ending mandatory minimums. For young people, that's called determinate sentencing, and that also really needs to end, and it prevented us from getting some young people released during the COVID-19 crisis, which was completely irresponsible, but also we want to intervene. And finally, for our healthy community secure care legislation, which is what we really drove our program last time, we're now going to contest to make sure that it's studied in a way that actually evaluates how much this will cost in public dollars over the long term. And because while we think we should do what's best for kids, regardless of the money, the truth is that this is being a better steward of public dollars over the long term, and we need to force legislators to reckon with that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. And I think what's so important is that you're really thinking about how are we changing the system, right? There are policies, there are structures that are not working, and how do we think about moving away from that status quo? And I think looking at other states who've been successful using different models is a really great way to think about that. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Thanks, Luisa. The Climate and Clean Energy Working Group of the Coalition is going to do one thing similar to what we did last year, is we're only going to limit our focus to 4 bills or so. We have a limited bandwidth. We recognize that, and we want to be good at what we do. However, the big difference is we're going to do this much, much earlier in the session. Currently, we are working on this now. We're collecting information about which bills we want to support. We're working with environmental groups and other organizations to help identify these bills, and we're using a screening process. Obviously, the bills we're going to support have to have a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but they also have to have a strong coalition of supporters in order to make it worth our while to really engage. And finally, it has to make sense in terms of the austere budget climate, which we expect will be in effect for the legislative session in 2021. We are meeting with the legislators earlier in the process. Frankly, we did it last year in December and January. That is a day late and a dollar short. The bills are already set. It's harder to influence the process late in the game.
Great, thank you. And that just ties right into what Brad was saying, that they found successful is really getting started early.
Yeah.
All right, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm going to ditto a lot of what Sharon said as well, because we got such a late, I mean, we just kind of decided, let's go do this, you know, at the last year, like at the last minute. And so a lot of that, you know, doing the organizing now, we're doing a lot of those same things. We have weekly meetups right now with our coalition and have been doing a lot of that. But for us, you know, I mean, the issue, and I think this is probably for a lot of the grassroots things, the makeup of the Senate doesn't change. We may have a different governor next year. We have one candidate currently who is pro repealing right to work, one who is not. And so like the issue is, you know, how do you get, you know, that just is, it's a very complicated, what's your goal there? And I don't think that it's going to be a thing where we can just, you know, snap our fingers, no matter how much organizing we do, where it's going to be that change next year. It's still going to be probably a process and a working towards that. Although I have heard some Democratic leadership say this is going to happen in the next few years. So, but it's just a matter of, setting those benchmarks and, keep working towards it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think especially in Virginia, because we have such short sessions, being clear what your benchmarks are for each year is helpful, right? So that there isn't this expectation that, okay, as long as we all come together this year, it's going to happen. I think the fact that there are certain bills that it will take multiple years and figuring out how to accommodate that and to set those expectations.
Yeah, and the fact, I mean, the repeal, our bill is really, it's like one sentence, like repealing right to work. It's a very short bill. There's not a lot of, there's not jockeying on like how to do this differently. It's just this one line. So there's not really negotiating, but it was a huge victory for us. We died. It took 3 votes for us to die in the Appropriations Committee this year, which is historic, not just for Virginia, but this is something that hasn't been repealed in any state since like the 1950s. And you're talking about having got that far in a southern state as well. So, I mean, those are big deals, even if you're not, winning the actual repeal. To be moving that far creates momentum. So
yeah, that's great. And then we're gonna finish up with Brad.
I got a foster dog in the back who just got mad at some funders. So if you hear barking, that's what's going on. So what we need to do for future sessions is build our institutional capacity for doing legislative advocacy. And I see there's really one or two ways of doing that. One is to professionalize, which I think we need to do anyway. So if you are interested in donating to a good criminal justice reform group, www.justiceforwardva.com. We would love to get your donations because we're trying to hire somebody to deal with this stuff full time. But short of that, and actually probably in addition to that, regardless, we have to mobilize more people, more volunteer advocates to go down to Richmond, to respond to those short notice calls, to stand in front of committees, to go to legislative offices and talk to legislators, to speak knowledgeably about the issues. And I think the hurdle for us in doing that is actually getting good, solid information and explaining it to lay people. A lot of criminal justice reform is really in the weeds. And I think we're as lawyers, we take that for granted. We have to be very intentional about getting y'all super informed. And by the way, just stay tuned because that's what we're all about this summer. There's an emergency session of the legislature that's going to convene in August, most likely. All of July, the next 5-6 weeks, it's going to be all about us having explainer videos and articles about the kinds of issues that are going to be in front of the General Assembly and what really is going to work, what doesn't work so well.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. And so yeah, guys, please start to follow them and see how you can get involved. So what we want to do now is to turn it back over to Josh Cole and see if Josh has any reflection on what he heard and thoughts about how the grassroots can best be supportive of the work that he's planning to do in 2021. So Josh, are you still with us?
I am still here. So everything that I heard everyone say was absolutely amazing, and it's so true. I do want to also keep in mind, I've been noticing through the chat that we have both the House and the Senate, but it's key to note that the House, which I'm proud of, is a little more progressive than the Senate is. And I keep hearing everyone stating that we can't change the Senate. And I believe we absolutely can, just not in this time frame. So what we have to do is in preparation, I know we're talking about session, but you should also be considering who is going to run in the next Senate election as well when we get down the road. Who's there, who's going to retire, who's going to run again, who's going to primary, different things like that. So keep that in mind, because that can still help out with grassroots. And you guys have done a great job with helping me and my campaign, both in 2017 and in 2019, to get us to this place. And so I am a testimony that the great work that you all can do as it relates to the campaign side of getting progressive and great candidates into the General Assembly. And if you could do it for me, you absolutely can do it for others. Pinpointing off what somebody said about labor and supporting candidates that ended up not supporting labor in the General Assembly session. I have shared this with SEIU. I've shared this with Virginia AFL-CIO, and I am sharing it with you all now. If there are candidates who told you they would support measures in the election, and then the General Assembly came up and they faltered, you have to make sure, I understand it's hard and I might get in trouble later, but you have to make sure you're putting your efforts behind the candidates who will actually do the work. So keep that in mind. If you supported them in the election and they got to the General Assembly and they did not do what they said they were going to do, maybe it's time to pull your support and support a candidate who will, because we have to make sure we get these measures passed in the General Assembly. And this past General Assembly, even with us having the majority, some of my colleagues and some of the friends in the other body have really showed where their side is. So we have to pay attention to that. It is extremely key. And so what I think is very important as well, and I think I heard it mentioned that we may have a special session. It's most likely going to be in August or September. So now's the opportunity to start getting your gears rolling. Already contact your legislators, your senators, your delegates, and say, hey, this is what's going on. We really, really want an independent community review board, or we really need a moratorium for evictions and different things like that. This special session is most likely going to be centered around COVID-19 and police brutality and police reform. So with that in mind, you guys can get into gear now by contacting your delegates and your state senators and say, hey, we don't know, we've heard about the special session, but we don't know when it is, but we want this to be on your mind. We want you to know that we want this measure passed, or these types of measures passed. Because many of my colleagues, we have already been communicating and talking about which pieces of legislation as it relates to COVID relief and police reform that we're already talking about. So if you start calling your legislators and sending them emails now, they know what's going to be, they're going to know, all right, the grassroots have this on their mind. They want to see this done. I have to make sure I'm supporting this. At least start those conversations going. So when the governor does call for the special session and releases the dates, the speaker will call what the type of session will be. You've already started talking and already started communicating. So that's a little insight for August or September, whenever we get there. And as we're looking forward to the general session in January, there's going to be such a wide variety of other bills that are going to be introduced. So we know that there will be some pieces of legislation that didn't get passed last session that may come back up. So if you want to see those pieces of legislation return, contact those chief patrons and say, hey, you put this legislation in, it didn't pass last session, would you mind bringing it back up again? And then get on top of contacting your legislators to make sure they're supported. Now, I know many of our friends are in Northern Virginia, but there are many people who are watching this that may not live in a blue district. That does not mean you don't contact your Republican legislator. We still need you to put pressure on them as well. We still need you to call them, because what I found out, many people may not believe this, but what I found out is we do have some of our friends on the other side of the aisle who feel enough pressure will vote as long as it's not a major issue or a major partisan issue, they will come over on our side. So especially if you're in Virginia Beach, especially if you're in the western part of Northern Virginia, some of those legislators are willing to come over as long as it's not a hyper partisan issue. So if you're in a red district, still reach out to your legislators. I know it may be daunting and you may get tired because it feels like your voice isn't heard, but it's still important to contact them as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. So I am looking at the time, and because we like to stay timely in our coalition meeting kind of work, it looks like we will not have a time to break out into groups right now, because I would want to give you 15 minutes and then we wouldn't have time for Q&A. So what I want to do instead is ask you the questions that we were going to have you discuss in your groups and have you put those answers in the chat so we can still learn from each other and we can still make connections. So the first question we were going to ask you is, what are some of the legislative successes that you have been part of or that you have seen? And what do you think made them successful? So we're trying to figure out what are the lessons learned? How can we get better as grassroots organizations? So if you can think about what are some things that you think has made legislative success possible, put it in the chat. And especially if you were part of a group that did that, put the name of that group in the chat too. That way we can start to get a sense of what is that network out there? How are we all connecting? And if your group has a website or some way to get in touch with them, please include that as well. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to do that. And as you're thinking about it, I also want to let you know that I've been paying attention to the questions that have been coming up. So we will get to those in a minute so that everyone has a chance to engage the panelists with their questions. So I'm seeing some good stuff starting to come in on youth mental health training for teachers, that it failed one year, but then it was passed the second year. And this is something we see in Virginia all the time, right? Sometimes you just can't get legislation through year one because people need to get a chance to, you need some time to get to know it and understand it. And so don't use a failure in one year as a reason to not introduce it the next year. We've got VCEA, was a great win this year. I agree. Yeah, lots of stuff is now coming in. So we're gonna share this chat with you guys afterwards so you can go back and figure out what are some of the lessons learned that you can take forward. So wonderful, this is great. All right. So the second question I want you to consider and then put your responses in the chat are, what would it take for your group, whether it's a grassroots group, whether it's a nonprofit organization, to get them more engaged in legislative advocacy? What do you think, if we were going to ask you to sort of commit to a next step, what would that next step be? So if you can think through, what is the next step for my organization? Sort of like what the panelists just discussed. What are they planning to do for this upcoming year? If you could share that next step, that'll sort of be our commitment to each other on how are we going to be even more engaged and more dedicated to this work in the next session in 2021. So take a minute or two to put in your, what is your next step? And while you're doing that, you can do it as we keep going. I'd like to go to some of the questions. So first question I have is from Juanita. Juanita, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? If not, I will ask it for you.
Please do.
Okay, I will. So Juanita said, working on a rally in a rural area hasn't seen one yet. The white privilege perception is that there is no racism here. Working in support of Black organizers and leaders, what issues should we be thinking about in terms of criminal justice reform that might be under our radar? So I think Brad sort of addressed this a little bit in the chat, but Brad, do you have any thoughts that you would like to share?
Sure. So what you're hearing right now from a lot of folks is focusing on point of arrest type policies, like let's stop choking people, you know, let's stop killing them, all good things. But you can stop, you know, if all we do is that, there will still be 1 million Black Americans in jails and prisons in America. And what the real problem is, it's over-policing of communities of color, and that's really what we need to address. What you're seeing in terms of, Black Lives Matter and those things, we're talking right now about the worst symptom of a system that produces these terrible outcomes. And if a system can produce these terrible outcomes, think about all the other bad stuff it does. So we think as an organization that we need to get rid of pretexts. So like the nonsense reasons that police can harass people when they're driving their cars or walking down the street. One example in Virginia is having stuff dangling from your rearview mirror. You can have a rosary dangling from your rearview mirror. That's considered an obstruction to your view. And a police officer just willy-nilly can pull you over, can ask to search your car. Another big one that did not get passed earlier this year was the odor of marijuana as the probable cause to initiate a stop of somebody on a street. Incredibly common, mostly affects, way disproportionately affects Black people. That needs to be done in August. Beyond that, I think the major issue with police reform in Virginia is going to be civilian review boards, but they can't be the kind that only deal with isolated incidents of excessive force. We need real civilian oversight boards that allow community input into policies, into budgets, into personnel decisions, that have subpoena power, that really can help reshape policing in local communities. There's a whole bunch of others, and actually there's going to be an update blog post on our website. You can keep up with us. We'll keep you informed if you want more information on this.
Great, thanks, Brad. Gary, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think that one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that when we're trying to defeat white supremacy, I think it's important to simultaneously keep in mind that white supremacy kind of existed as a strategy of the former planter elites. And what that means is that it was used as a form of social control and used as a form of division. And so I think when we're organizing in rural areas, and Rise for Youth has had to do this a little bit as we've built coalitions to defeat youth prisons, it's important to talk to people about, not on a moral basis of you should be anti-racist, but on the kind of political basis of what's in your interest. And so one of the things that the ACLU, for example, is supporting is that anyone who is over 18 has the right to vote. In Florida, we saw a successful coalition of across color lines be pulled together. It got some kind of white support for restoring voting rights of people who had felony records. And so I do think it's important that we have a kind of anti-racist politic that understands racism's role in creating division and doesn't suppress the conversation about privilege, but does try to build a kind of principled unity on the basis of recognizing that the system doesn't help everybody and everyone can be organized on the basis of interest.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for sharing. So there's another question, which I'm going to have Sharon answer. And it's a very simple one, but when you say we need to start early, when is early?
Now, What we're doing, at least for us, is in the Clean Energy Working Group, is we're trying hard to go through this filtering process, what bills make sense. And we just started sending out, I mean, literally this week, emails to some legislators to say, hey, you know, what are you guys thinking? Here's kind of what we're thinking for this upcoming year. And also making sure that we have that network of coalitions. So I really think now is a very good time to start, you know, doing your homework, doing your research, making sure you've got a good viable bills.
Great, thank you. So it really is a year-round process. And I think that's something that we need to be more aware of. So, all right, so another question we had, and we'll just take a couple of the panelists can chime in. How much did you work with established advocacy groups? And if you did, which ones did you work with? So I'm gonna start with Michelle.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself, sorry. So we worked with we were working closely with the Virginia AFL-CIO, and in particular, I'm based out of Northern Virginia, so with the Northern Virginia AFL-CIO. And, you know, all of the unions within the Virginia AFL-CIO support the repeal of right to work. So we were kind of more as there to amplify their messaging and worked very closely with them along the way. And then there were a lot of other established, I mean, like just grassroots organizations, the Indivisibles and NAACPs, you know, a lot of young Dems, Democratic committees and stuff that were supportive. A lot of people in this group were also supportive of us, but, you know, really, I mean, Labor's the one that has like the full-time, I mean, they have people that are there in Richmond a lot. And so they were kind of just, you know, we were just there like, how do we help, you know, and that was kind of our deal.
Great. Brad, do you want to share?
Sure. My favorite nonprofit in Virginia is the Legal Aid Justice Center. I give them like half of the money I give to charity because they're amazing. We partner with them a lot. ACLU-UVA does some good work. National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the RISE is always a good partner. I think like a lot of NAACP chapters are getting stronger. Traditionally the strongest, I think, at least that we work with is Fairfax County NAACP. They're totally awesome. But those are the groups we partner with the most. Oh, and one other thing, criminal justice reform, a lot of you might know this, it's bipartisan. So like at our lobby day, we had a bunch of folks from Americans for Prosperity there. So I know not really the speed of this group, but sometimes, you know, there are strange bedfellows in our advocacy space.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important to remind ourselves that if it's a bill that other people across the aisle are, you know, potentially interested in supporting, when is it okay for us to, you know, have those partnerships? So that's really helpful to remember. You can learn more about the groups that Sharon worked with in the next coalition session, which is going to be at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to just plug that. Hopefully you will join and you can hear more about the environmental groups that were part of that work especially on the VCEA. And so the last question, I'm going to actually turn it over to Josh, and that is, how receptive do you think the GA in its special session would be to issues beyond COVID and police reform? I know some people are wondering about voting in November, among other issues. So what are your thoughts, Josh?
So the way the special session actually works is when the governor calls a special session, it's the Speaker of the House who sets the agenda for the special session. And so it was already established that the special session would be strategically just for the state budget and COVID-19 issues. But I called the speaker and I said, hey, with everything that's going on, let's take a look at some police reform. And apparently I wasn't the only one of my colleagues that called her about it. So she expressed interest in just those three things: COVID-19, the budget, and police reform. But keep this in mind, voting rights could fall under COVID-19, because if people can't get to the polls due to public safety, that can still fall under COVID-19. So voting by mail, different things like that, removing the witness on an absentee ballot, all of that can fall under COVID-19. So some of those issues may be addressed if it's related to voting rights. And so other things can be introduced as long as it's related to those three. If you can find some way to make some correlation between those three, it can be addressed in a special session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. So
Thank
we are coming to the end of this fabulous panel. If you are not already on the mailing list for the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email again in the chat. I maintain the email list. Our emails go out once a week, and they're recaps, and we bring together all of these grassroots groups and the work that they're doing so that you can kind of have a snapshot of that once a week. And then we also have a great website, which I also posted, that you can check out to see all of the work, the ongoing work of the coalition. And I will say the website front page changes depending upon if it's legislative session, we're highlighting the legislative work. If it's if we're working on elections, we're talking about the candidates that we've adopted. And right now it's the Women's Summit. So it has all of the great sessions that you have the opportunity to attend for the next week. So thank you all for participating, and I'm going to turn this back over to Stair. Stair, do you want to unmute yourself?
She's there. She's getting set up. That was a great session. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Hi, Stair.
Hello.
Wonderful job. I'll mute myself.
Thank you, everyone. Let me get my face up here. Okay, am I up here now?
There you are.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, let me also make this a little bit bigger for everyone to see who might be watching on video later. So that was a fabulous session. I think X means 10, and I think that we give a solid 10 to the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Michelle, Brad, everyone who's worked on this so hard. And thank you all for being in the room. Hope to see many of you shortly at our second wrap up of the coalition conversation, the focus on climate and clean energy. And if you're not going to make that, be sure that you don't miss tomorrow, Primary Day Power Lunch, Politics of Voting with Nero Tandem.
And Gabby Goldstein of Sister.
And Gabby Goldstein, sorry, yep, and Gabby Goldstein. And also there will be a summit recap of this session emailed out, and the videos will be available on our Network Nova YouTube channel. And tonight we are sponsoring the Hunter Mill women and their Dump Trump, Ditch Mitch, and Disbar Bar dolls. And if you order tonight, you will receive 5 extra pins. So please do that. And then also I want to continue to plug my hat. Okay, winning is the only option. I see a sea of them across the US. So enjoy this final video from our faithful sponsors and partners. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong, stay together. Winning is the only option in 2020. Thank you all.
Thank you. In Virginia, yay. I can't get sound. Stair, the sound isn't, I don't hear any sound.
It's coming not from my end.
We provide factual updates with insights from both sides of the aisle, presenting a clear picture of the latest government outcomes and what they mean for you. Our team oversees the General Assembly in person each year and delivers real-time updates from inside the government. And we report not only headline news, but on a broad range of political issues, delivered in a digestible form to your inbox. Get informed and get involved today with VA Our Way.
Can you answer the question? Who's going to get it right? Oh, wow. That's a lot of bills. Well, I want to thank Nancy Rice, if she's still in the room, Win Virginia, and Virginia Our Way for being our sponsor, and of course, the Virginia Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy. Thank you for being here, and I'm so excited about our second part of the session. So I hope you're back. I don't know if we're going to play any more videos for fun or we're done. So, but thank you for being in the room. Letter X.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See you at 7.
See you at 7. Get some dinner. Good job, Luisa. Awesome panel. Awesome. John, good to see you. Glad everybody's